Welcome to the Free Library of Philadelphia. I'm Jason Freeman, Author Events Office Ambassador, and I am very excited to be here tonight to introduce Barbara Ehrenreich. Journalist and social critic Barbara Ehrenreich, who, according to the Los Angeles Times, has, quote, for more than 40 years, been one of our most accomplished and outspoken advocacy journalists and activists, is one of America's most iconoclastic polymaths. She is the best-selling author of a score of books, including the working class exposé Nickel and Dimed, in which she subsisted on poverty-level wages for a year, living with a wild God, an intimate reconstruction of the philosophical and spiritual inquiry of her youth, and Bait and Switch, in which she investigated the economic shadow world of white-collar unemployment. Ms. Ehrenreich also holds a PhD in cellular immunology from Rockefeller University and is the winner of several awards, including the 2018 Erasmus Prize for her investigative journalism, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and a Ford Foundation Award. Tonight, she joins us with her latest book, titled Natural Causes, an Epidemic of Wellness, the Certainty of Dying, and Killing Ourselves to Live Longer, which seems pretty self-explanatory, but I'll explain a little more. Employing science, sociological trends, and personal experience to examine the paradox of killing ourselves to live longer lives. A review in last week's New York Times praises it as tender and deeply distinctively odd, replete with her characteristic curiosity and awe at the natural world, and that the pleasures of her prose are often local in the animated language, especially where scientific descriptions are concerned. Tonight, Ms. Ehrenreich will be joined in conversation by our own Laurel Kovacs, author, events producer, associate director, and colleague extraordinaire. Here to tell us more about this book, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Barbara Ehrenreich to the Free Library of Philadelphia.
Welcome back to the Free Library.
Well, thank you. And you all paid to come here? I'm used to audiences of, just who are homeless and need a place to get indoors. And
Not tonight. It really is an honor to talk to you about this new book. You open the book by saying you have given up on preventive medical care. What led you there?
Oh, well, it was no sudden decision, and it certainly wasn't anything suicidal. I got suspicious, and I'm very skeptical. So one test after another, I would question. And I would do a little research. What's the idea here? And I'll tell you the secret for doing research. When they confront you with, you need a, blah, blah test, just Google blah, blah, and the words controversy. Or the same thing, and the word evidence-based. You will find out whether, what's going on, what's the discussion about this. And the interesting thing is I started doing this just at a time when a lot of the preventive care, the elderly and the middle-aged are subjected to, is coming under question from a lot of physicians, too.
You write that medicine is presented and legitimized with the word scientific, but you focus a lot on the phrase evidence-based. Why is that an important phrase?
Well, I was educated as a scientist. I got a PhD in cellular immunology. I never imagined it would come in so handy. I didn't know why I was doing it. But anyway, the idea of the reason we respect medicine is that it has this veneer of science, right? We're not, well, some of us, I have to be careful what I say now because there's so many alternative healers, who are swishing around in robes and lighting incense and everything. But, if we have a special respect for the people in white coats. And white coat is interesting. Why do they need that? That's from the laboratory. If you work in a laboratory, you use white coats. Why you need it around patients? Just to show that you have been in a laboratory or might someday go to one. So, the medicine, as it is practiced, has this, it says that it's scientific. And that's why we trust it. That's why I have always trusted it. But then as you look more closely, as a lot of MDs and mathematicians have been doing since the 70s, you begin to find that there's very little of an evidentiary basis for a lot of procedures and a lot of things that go on. And so at some point I started thinking, no, I'm not going to have a mammogram. Nah, colonoscopy, are you kidding? You want to do that? And one thing after another, partly it was laziness or having a lot of other things to do, but a lot of it was just finding, losing my trust in the scientific basis of a lot of medicine.
What do you mean when you say Western medicine is a ritual?
Well, I didn't say quite Western medicine is a ritual. That's what Laura's saying, but I'm not saying quite that. But if you're doing things that have no kind of basis in science, and you're doing them repeatedly and sort of solemnly, that's what's called a ritual. And when anthropologists first went out from Europe and America to other parts of the world and observed indigenous people doing, quote, sort of what looked like healing rituals, they said, oh, those are rituals. They've involved drums and dancing and waving, magical things around. That's not science. That's silly. That's what natives do. But when you look at what goes on in so many medical procedures, you realize you are witnessing a ritual that is probably no more based, in some cases, in experience and careful assessment of results than the indigenous people's rituals. Now, I wouldn't push that too hard. There are things, if I get run over by a bus, first place I'll go to, if I can move, is a doctor's office, right? Not some indigenous healer or alternative healer. I trust Western medicine for many things, including things having to do with trauma and violence and injury, and also the care, of babies and small children. But even there, I'm full of questions.
I first came across your work in writing classes, and I was surprised to learn that your PhD is actually in cellular immunology. How did that inform this book, and specifically when your research led you to macrophages?
Oh, I hope we can talk about macrophages tonight. That's why you're all here, right? My editor was so like, oh, do we have to have all these macrophages? And, they come in because these are cells in our body, immune cells. They're frontline defenders of our bodies against any kind of microbial invasion. They're our friends, right? I studied them as a graduate student. That was what my doctoral thesis was about, was macrophages. I loved them. They were heroes. Then, in about 2007, I read in Scientific American about new work showing that macrophages, our friends, they like to show up at tumor sites. And what do you think they're doing there? They should be fighting the tumor. No, they're assisting the tumor. They're helping it grow. Tumors can't metastasize. In many, many cases, and I don't know all, this is all new work, but certainly in breast cancer and other well-known, common forms of cancer, they can't metastasize without the help of macrophages. Macrophages allow them to go to other parts of the body and set up colonies, that is, tumors.
What do you think when you hear a medicine is designed to boost your immune system?
Well, I think it's kind of funny. We hear that all the time. And this city has been kind of command central for positive psychology at Penn. You know what that is? Yeah, okay. I'm not going to say too much about it here. That's in another book of mine. But the whole deal that it was based on, the quote science, was that your attitude, your mood, can influence your immune system and hence help you to beat cancer or whatever you're fighting. Now, no is the answer to that one. I mean, if you starve yourself and you're in terrible stress, your immune system will become less active, less able to fight off disease. But when you consider the immune system's role in certain diseases, not just breast cancer, then you begin to wonder, what? You want to boost the immune system? They're traitors. Parts of the immune system. And consider some other large examples of treason by the immune system. Autoimmune diseases. What's that about? That is about some immune cells, again, macrophages play a very prominent role, deciding, we have nothing better to do, let's attack some organs in our own body. Let's just wreck them. And they do that. Or so many of the ailments associated with aging, and I do mean ailments, I'm at this stage myself, have finally been found just in the last few years to be inflammatory in nature. Arthritis, for example, cardiovascular disease. That's macrophages crowding up those arteries that lead to the heart. And I'm leaving some out here, but I would think twice before you go on boosting that immune system. Not that we have any way to do so anyway, if we're not starving or totally stressed out.
How do you respond to critics who point to the importance of this kind of testing for the early detection of disease?
For the early catching of diseases. Well, that's what they say. We got to catch it early. One problem with that is that, and because usually they're thinking of cancer, and the assumption has been it starts small and it gets big. Big is worse than little. So you want to get it when it's little. Only trouble is, tumors have different life cycles. Some that are very small are extremely vicious. Some that are large are, quote, indolent, to use the medical term. So it's not that clear cut. That model has been grossly overused. And also, if you're testing like once a year, a lot of mischief can go on between tests. You'd have to probably get tested almost daily to see what was coming along to kill you.
How do we go about reducing these ritual kind of medical procedures, preventive medicine, when we're still fighting for greater access to healthcare for underserved parts of the population?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, one of the things that bothers me about all this is that there is so much unnecessary, and I'm not the only one who argues that. You can look at my sources, the MDs who are now fighting against overdiagnosis of illness in the elderly. But there's so much resources are lavished on the elderly in our country. It's not till 65 that you get Medicare. Meanwhile, we have a society where some people don't get such vital things. I was shocked to learn recently that maternal mortality is rising in the United States. Now, it's been going down for decades. Suddenly it goes up, and it's not a blip, especially among Black women, especially in states that hate women, as evidenced, for example, by all the restrictions they place on abortion rights. So we have things like that. We have cases, and I watch for these all the time, where kids have died because parents could not afford a dentist to pull an infected tooth. Meanwhile, I, being over 65, am fighting against doctors who want to do too much silly stuff.
You bring me to my next question. Back in 2009, you published an article in the LA Times entitled, "We Need a New Women's Health Movement." It ends with this sentence: "What we don't need, no matter how pretty and pink, is a ladies' auxiliary to the cancer industrial complex." Can you comment on the prevailing medical propaganda regarding pink ribbons and mammography?
Oh, yeah, well, I did have breast cancer, and I like to say I'm a survivor. I'm a survivor of the pink ribbon cult, because that's what really got me down. The infantilization of women when they are diagnosed with breast cancer. I'll give you one example. Somebody sent me a goodie bag that one of New York City's most famous cancer hospitals gives to its patients with breast cancer. So I looked inside, and there were like lots of, you've seen this, huh? Like moisturizers and some cheap jewelry and on, very femme things, and then a pack of crayons. So I called the hospital, and I called the breast cancer department or whatever it was, and I said, "This is very kind of you to give these things to your patients, but what's with the crayons?" And she said, "Oh, well, that's like if you want to put any of your thoughts down." And I said, "I am a writer, and we don't use crayons anymore." That's what I mean by infantilization.
In reading your book, I couldn't help but be struck by the unintended side effect, which is steering a few less dollars to the business of medicine. Are you finding doctors whose practice aligns with your new thesis?
What of medicine?
Are you finding doctors whose practice aligns with your avoidance of preventive medicine?
Last time I had to get a new primary care doctor when the old one evaporated for some reason. I met this doctor, and I said, "Here's the deal. I will come to you if something is bothering me, but you are not to go looking for problems, okay?" And she agreed, I mean, every now and then they'll try to sneak in some test. They can't help themselves. And I say, "No, I don't do that." Of course they'll find problems. And some of them maybe, in some cases, will save you from an earlier death than you would have had. But you can always find problems, like a CAT scan. There will always be some kind of shading. There's some kind of little place that they want to investigate, meaning you enter into a cascade of further testing.
What is your response when, in the name of wellness, a person's workplace offers free medical screenings?
Free medical what?
Screenings.
In the name of wellness, the workplace offers screening. Well, wellness is an interesting concept. Wellness for the working class means, which is white collar and blue collar, means your employer institutes a wellness program. Sounds great. But what that actually means is that the employer, wants to monitor your weight and maybe your blood pressure. And if you don't participate in this monitoring, you will be financially penalized. This is infuriating to people. And the idea was it would save the employer on the health insurance costs for employees. However, studies have shown it doesn't even do that. So it just becomes another way that authority of the boss is expressed over employees. Wellness, of course, is a whole other thing for the wealthy. Something I would just love to explore if I had a fortune. Actually, I don't think I would like it for too long, but it's like Gwyneth Paltrow. There are a lot of celebrity wellness gurus now. Amanda Bacon is a big one. She's in LA, and she makes skin products, and she offers a curated lifestyle that you might want to participate in with her, which basically means you spend all day rubbing products on yourself and trying to, sense if there's any little twinge anywhere in your body or mind that needs attention. One of the most fascinating things about this woman is when she lists the food she eats, the list included pearls. Now, I should have followed up with further research, like deep fat fried? What do you mean? But it's about spending money so that you show yourself that you love yourself.
And there is nothing better than loving yourself in today's pop psychology.
Right.
How did Silicon Valley both create the problem and the solution with mindfulness?
Oh, well, Silicon Valley. I think it's hilarious, and I don't know why more people haven't commented on this, that it began to be noted early in this century that we were losing our powers of concentration. And, there's just too much going on. I don't have to tell you, if you've got devices, If you've got children, you probably last spoke to them a week ago when they looked up from their phone for a moment. But so it seemed like there was a real problem in America. The average adult attention span in this country is now less than that of a goldfish. You can look up the studies that establish this. So who's going to solve this? Well, of course, Silicon Valley. And a bunch of, I would call them hucksters, ended up in Silicon Valley in about 06, 07, et cetera, with the new idea, mindfulness. You sort of teach people how to concentrate again. And how do you do that? With an app. There are hundreds and hundreds of apps for sale to help you become mindful. What they are generally involved is timed meditation. See, the meditation anybody here meditate? Okay, I'm not there yet, but I'm growing, Anyway, but who has time to meditate? So the Silicon Valley idea was you'd get these timed intervals of about 1 minute of meditation and then move on through your day feeling enlightened. So they took Buddhism and sort of took all the religion out of it. It's not a theistic religion, but they took the notion of enlightenment out of it and just turned it into this little thing you'd get in an app for 60 seconds or a few more seconds.
How did your experience with the medical profession inform your feminist consciousness?
Well, that all goes back to my first pregnancy, and I was being seen in the clinic of a hospital. I didn't have a private doctor. And at the end of your pregnancy, in the last month, you got this examination by the big shot, the OBGYN head of the department. So he does his thing down there. And then when he got up again, I said, "So, is the cervix beginning to dilate?" Those are my exact words. He looks at the nurse and he said, "Where did a nice girl like this ever learn to talk like that?" Now, I was a nice girl at that moment who had just gotten the PhD in cellular immunology. And if he thought that was bad, I could have said a lot more obscene things. So I think it was at that moment I realized it doesn't matter, the PhD, whatever education I have, if I can be seen as a member of some subordinate sort of species, women.
You've published an article just earlier this month on Lenny Letter, and it was entitled, "When a Routine Exam Feels Like an Assault, Are Annual Pelvic Examinations Necessary?" You explain that medical and especially gynecological procedures are susceptible to misuse by predators because they so closely resemble real sexual interaction. American women undergo pelvic exams twice as often as women in other advanced societies. You write, "Clearly, the medical profession has a reckoning coming." My question is, what signs have you seen in your research and your travels that this reckoning is approaching?
I'm just trying to make it happen. As usual, just making trouble. No, I think it's alarming, and this is something that grew out of the research for this book, Natural Causes, is that one of the things that has been found to be, quote, an empty ritual is the annual physical exam. Forget it. Take, my philosophy, something looks wrong or is bothering you, then you go in. The other thing is the annual pelvic exam that women are supposed to be subjected to once a year. It's not recommended anymore by the agencies and the medical boards that study the usefulness of these things. So why are they doing it? Why are we submitting to it again and again? I think that not all doctors are, well, I have to be careful what I say here, but I think there are doctors who enjoy the sense of power that doing these things gives to them. Some may even get a sexual kick out of it. There have certainly been cases of sexual assault masked as ordinary medical procedures. And I cite a particularly horrifying one of very young girls being told, they were like our gymnasts, being told that, well, this is just, we got to do this. This is your checkup. And without anybody's asking, why is he doing these checkups once a day on each girl? What's going on?
There's a passage at the end of the book that really stopped me in my tracks, and I was going to ask you if you'd mind reading just a paragraph I've marked.
Okay, well, you have to say, just to explain this, that there is a deeper scientific and philosophical theme that comes out more in the last half or third of the book, and that is how Western science has tended to treat the world as if it were dead. And I particularly blame the kind of biology I was trained in which you could not study any living thing until you had killed it, and killed the cells in it, and fixed them on a microscope. So the whole philosophy is of a world in which the only consciousness, the only agency exists in us or in a monotheistic deity. Here I'm talking now about my dying, and I have just rejected this scientific paradigm, and I'm saying it is one thing to die into a dead world, and metaphorically speaking, leave one's bones to bleach on a desert lit only by a dying star. It is another thing to die into the actual world, which seethes with life, with agency other than our own, and at the very least with endless possibility. For those of us, which is probably most of us, who have got glimpses of this animate universe, death is not a terrifyingly leap into the abyss. Well, let me try that again. Death is not a terrifying leap into the abyss, but more like an embrace of ongoing life.
How did your research about cellular decision-making lead you to this point where you're contemplating life and death? You talk a lot about cellular decision-making. Cellular decision-making.
Yeah, this is the bizarre thing. So I was trying to figure out what's going on with these macrophages that turn against us, that commit these acts of treason. And the deeper I got into it, well, there's been some amazing new work, just like in the last decade, because of new kinds of microscopes that allow scientists to see living cells within living tissue, not just dead cells fixed on a microscope slide. And when you are able to watch individual cells, you see they're not all just operating like little soldiers marching along together doing the same things. They wander off, they do different things. Some of them, going rogue is not just an option, it's half of what's going on. And cellular decision-making is not a phrase I would ever have dared to come up with. I mean, how could a little cell with no nervous system, of course, make decisions? Well, it's taking in signals all the time from the world around it. It's integrating those signals and making decisions about what to attack and what to just go right by.
Do you agree with the reviewer who wrote that how to live well, even joyously, while accepting our mortality seems to be the philosophical challenge of this book?
Huh. It's to live well while accepting mortality. What are the alternatives? I mean, yeah. Try to have the best time you can. And, for me, that I'm not just saying that to be flippant and hedonistic, although I am both of those things. But, I have things that matter very much to me that I work on, that I believe in, like helping younger writers, writers of color, poor writers, be able to get into the mainstream and get published, or photographers and videographers. That's a project I work on. I've got a lot of work to do. So that's one thing I do. And try to have a good time.
At a lecture for one of your previous books, you said our society is seriously lacking in opportunities to experience acute joy. And you went on to say that...
What?
Acute joy.
Acute joy.
You went on to say that for you, protests used to be a source of that acute joy. Is that something you still participate in?
Boy, you make me sound like a nut. I need a fix. I got to go out and protest Trump. There is actually that. It does help. It does cheer you up, doesn't it? Get together with other people and shout. But I think I misstated that, or you did, maybe. But I think what is missing in our lives is collective joy, the joy of doing things together. The joy. We don't have festivals. We don't have, occasionally we have a book festival. And I'm sorry, but that's not my idea of a festival. I wrote a book called Dancing in the Streets, which is all about this theme and how it has been that kind of thing which was so central to the lives of our ancestors, whether our ancestors were African, Caribbean, European, whatever, is missing in our lives. You can't, we don't just join hands with other people on the street and say, hey, let's celebrate. Let's celebrate the miracle that we are here alive at the same time. That's the miracle.
Would you talk about the study that you describe where terminally ill patients are given the active ingredient in magic mushrooms?
Oh, God. You are determined, Laura, to ruin my reputation. I have never had a magic mushroom. I wouldn't mind, but no, I think there's fascinating research going on. Is it Cornell? Do you remember? Cornell? No, maybe it's Johns Hopkins. Where they're taking people who are dying, who have so many months left to live, typically cancer patients, who are terrified of dying. And they've been experimenting with giving them psilocybin, which I think is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. See, she knows better than I do.
I've heard.
And they lose their fear completely. Actually, I shouldn't be advertising somebody else's book when we're talking about my book, and I'm not going to talk about James Comey's book, but Michael Pollan has a book coming out, which is coming out in June, I think, which is going to be about psychoactive drugs and how they could be better used in medicine, and that would be the place to look. But that fear of how can I'm going to lose everything, not just my body but myself. That fear can be destroyed by drugs that destroy that sense of self. Yeah, you can. It's possible. If that sounds, well, everybody's confused, but enough questions?
In your research for the book, what kinds of rebellion have you seen against medicalized dying?
That's a whole other book, which other people have written. There is a rebellion against medicalized dying. That's why we signed forms saying, do not resuscitate. Or if I get to a certain point, stop putting new tubes into me and let me go free, Roll me out of the ICU, let me outdoors. No, I think more and more of us are doing that, right? With your will. Be sure to do that. In fact, I was fascinated to read that doctors are often a lot more serious about this than we are. There are doctors who have DNR tattooed to their wrists, so there will be no confusion at the end. It's something we really want to avoid, is those last desperate measures to torment us, because that's what it will be, torment for another few hours of life or days.
Before I open this up to the audience, I just want to mention that your Twitter is an example of a Twitter done well. And here's just an example of a recent gem. Why doesn't Steve Bannon call me? If he got all of my info from Zuckerberg, surely he knows I have a soft spot for slovenly, pseudo-intellectual drunks.
I feel the rejection, I really do.
I love your sense of humor, but I want to go back to something that you focused on very early. I'm here.
Stand up.
Oh, it gets harder.
I know.
When you talk about rejecting empty rituals, perhaps, or I don't want another mammogram, let's not go looking for trouble. I worry very much that people are going to read that hear what they want to hear and say, oh, I'm not going to do vaccines, or I'm not going to take antibiotics. Not that we don't overuse those, but, I'm not going to fight infection, I'm going to pray. And that we'll lose what is real scientific medicine and life-saving intrusions.
Well, I don't think I'll take the blame here. I'm going to pass the buck here to Dr. H. Gilbert Welch and his colleagues at Dartmouth, who have written a book called Overdiagnosed, which is entirely on this theme, going test by test through things and how little of it actually reveals anything. There is a quiet insurrection within the medical profession. I would not give you advice to be like me. I mean, and I'm not saying do what I did. This is my decision. At age 76, if you find a cancer or whatever, I'm not getting it treated. No way I'm going to spend my last 2 years doing chemotherapy and whatever of my life. I don't have the time for that. That's just my philosophical angle. You may have a different view. But right now, I'm not alone in this. I'm not just some maniac, trying to cause mass suicide. Oh, God, I sound terrible. No, I am talking about what many physicians themselves are saying.
I've been a fan of yours in witches, nurses, and midwives.
Oh.
And by the way, I've also tried psilocybin. You would love it. It's probably one of the best times of my life, and it was 40 years ago.
Wow.
Any rate, did you think when you started pushing the envelope back in the early 70s that you would have this kind of success, or did you think you were going to be marginalized?
Did I think in the early 70s? Well, you're referring to one of my first anti-medical publications called Witches, Midwives, and Nurses, A History of Women Healers, written with my friend Deirdre English. And we went on to write more on those themes. But no, it wasn't about advancing careers or anything. We considered ourselves, and I still consider myself, part of a women's health movement. Feminists trying to understand and take charge of our own health. No, I didn't know. I never expected to be talking to so many people who paid.
You're a big proponent of evidence-based medicine and treatment. As a patient, do you ever ask your doctor, what is the percentage of success on this, and make a decision based on that?
They won't know. It is really depressing to me how ignorant a lot of physicians I have seen are. I had one who, I've had two who did not, as they put it, use the Google. It scares me when they talk like that, right? They don't keep up. I mean, and I don't keep up by reading the medical literature. I read like the New York Times and the Washington Post and all these other things. I scan a lot of newspapers and magazines. And, then if something excites my interest, I'll go deeper. But it's out there. And they don't seem to know.
Do you think that we'll get to the point where we will have assisted suicide laws in most states?
In the United States, in more
Yes.
places?
Yes.
I would hope so. He's asked, will we get to the point where we have assisted suicide more commonly in the world? And I would certainly hope so. Yes, I realize there are chances for abuse. Sometimes my own kids give me funny looks, But, no, it just seems like it ought to be a right. We're going to be able to check out of here at some point.
Thank you. Can you tell us the connective tissue between your cellular immunology and living in a transient motel for a year? And you know, how did you go from your PhD in science to nickeled and dimed in that interest?
Who are you? I'm just. I want to
My-
see. Oh,
I'm
there
Ed.
you are. Okay.
Hi.
It doesn't make sense. I never had a firm sense of career. I do things that powerfully attract me. I guess this is now called following your passion. I have a lot of passions, you know. So it didn't. Actually, I think everybody should get a PhD in cellular immunology. Everybody should, just as background, you know, general background.
I'm a practicing family physician, so I have intimate familiarity with a lot of the issues you spoke of in terms.
Hold it closer to you.
I'm sorry. I have a lot of familiarity with many of the issues that you spoke to this evening in terms of medical testing. As a matter of fact, I just last week passed my board recertification exam, and a big part of the examination was on the efficacy of medical testing. And just for the benefit of our audience, and I'm not accusing you of not being truthful, but a big part of primary medical training today, and also in internal medicine primary care, is a renewed look at which tests are useful and which are not useful. What do you think is the effect of society's role on asking for testing and asking for the types of procedures that you have been warning people not to get? Because
Yeah. Well, actually, thank you for telling us that, because you just validated me quite a bit. First, by calling me doctor, and second, though, by saying, yeah, these are issues that the medical profession is facing. How do we evaluate these tests? Why are we doing this one or that one? Right? Am I correct? Yes. That's what you're saying. Yes. Okay. And the question, though, was, what was the question? There are whole kinds of organizations that exist to promote testing. It used to be Katie Couric was the colonoscopy gal, right? She may still be doing it. Rudy Giuliani is the prostate cancer guy. And that's not a political judgment, that's just what he does. And even when the American, you know, I can't remember the whole name, the group that studies preventive medicine and sort of grades the test. Who? The U.S. Preventive Health Task Force. Thank you. When they declared that the PSA test for prostate cancer was useless, you know, that it should be stopped, he said, so what? Fake news, you know, and just persisted on promoting the testing. So yeah, you have constituencies out there among patients who feel they're not getting good care unless everything that was done to them 20 or 30 years ago is done again. And that's a problem.
One of the things that strikes me, and I have not read the book yet, but I did read Nickel and Dimed, and I'm struck by what seems to me to be very much a privileged person's outlook on medicine. And we are lucky enough to have doctors who may provide more care than we need. But there are millions of people in America for whom making the choices that you offer in your book are not even given to them. And I wonder how, given the other work you've done in your life, how you think about that when you think about us turning down health care in America.
Well, as I said before, it strikes me as absurd, painful, horrendous, that so much resources are dedicated to what are often questionable procedures for the affluent, or for those who are lucky enough to be 65 and over. And so little is dedicated to the young, the poor young, the sub-affluent young. And that, I mentioned that this is crazy, how much we have skewed our health resources away from the people who need it most.
I'm struck by how the pharmaceutical industry has developed medications to prevent stroke and heart attack and prolong the lives of people with cancer. But then when people live into old age, they have nothing to help people whose bodies have outlived their minds. And I just wondered what you have to say about the role of the pharmaceutical industry in this.
Wait, are we in a particular case?
In your whole, your ideas about testing and treatment, the role of the pharmaceutical industry.
Well, in some ways I'm not prepared to answer that very well. I will tell you I'm very suspicious of them. The absurdly high prices, especially we Americans pay for drugs that cost a tenth of that across the border in Mexico or Canada. That's part of it. But also, there's a story in my book that, they always want to do this bone density scanning for women of a certain age. And the pressure on doctors 10 or 15 years ago, on doctors' offices, I should say, was coming from Merck, the pharmaceutical company, because Merck had what they thought was a cure for osteoporosis, which is Fosamax, a drug that is supposed to strengthen your bones so they won't just fracture as you get older. So Merck was in there making it easier, pushing the equipment, the scanning equipment, onto doctors' offices with the idea it would make a lot of money off of Fosamax. Unfortunately, the news is not all good about Fosamax. In some women, it has the effect of causing bone fractures, which is exactly what we're up against. So I'm very suspicious about the pharmaceutical companies. But I don't think we can put all of our problems there.
My question is, having gone through breast cancer and having whatever treatments and procedures you did at the time.
Could you speak up? Speak closer to...
Sure. Having gone through breast cancer and having had whatever treatments you had at the time and procedures, what would you do differently, if anything, now that you've done this exploration?
If what? If I was diagnosed again
What
with breast cancer?
What would you have done differently?
I would have not have undergone the chemotherapy. For a lot of detailed personal things about my own body, I didn't think it made sense. But no. That was barbaric. It was torture. It took about a year of normal activity out of my life. So no. Take my chances.
Thank you very much for coming here today and for your critical mind. I very much appreciate it, especially your Bright-Sided, the book you wrote a few years ago. One thing I wanted to ask you was about the mindfulness. Don't you think that you may be giving it a short shrift by just identifying it with Silicon Valley like that? I understand what you're talking about. You're talking about this fad where you can see mindfulness on every corner of the street, so to speak. And I do meditate, and I've been studying Buddhist philosophy and techniques for over a year now. And I can tell you that mindfulness has many different, within Buddhism it has very specific meaning, but it has other uses, such as in some therapies they use mindfulness to help with emotional regulation, and it's very effective. So I'm just kind of, somebody asked whether you're not worried that you calling mindfulness madness, as you do in your book, that it might give a wrong impression to people who have no other source of knowledge about it.
Okay, well, I accept the criticism. I do. I am actually rather close to a couple of people who meditate, and I'm, that's okay with me. I'm tolerant. But when I think about it in my own case, I try to think, what does it mean to be mindful? As you were talking, I was trying to understand as hard as I could what you were saying. And that was mindful, right? Is that good, right? I wasn't thinking about whether I'm going to get anything to eat before I go to bed tonight, although that keeps coming back to me. But I try to focus on the one thing. But in most of life, it's a little distracting. I have been a mother and then a very involved grandmother of little kids, for a good part of my life. And yeah, you have to pay attention. But to what? There is so much going on. Somebody, a toddler is biting at your ankle, pulling your leg. The phone is ringing, and it's somebody you work with saying, we've got an urgent problem here. The dinner is boiling over on the stove. Or being a waitress, which I've been. We have to balance so many things at once. And nobody tells us what we should be mindful of at all times. Yeah, of course we should sit down, slow down, really listen to other people. But so the research that I drawn in this book suggests that you could accomplish that just as well by sitting down with some friends and maybe having a glass of wine or just watching the sun in the trees and so on. I hope that's not heretical. Thank you.
Well, for your curiosity and your outrage, I thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Barbara Ehrenreich.
Well, thank you, too.